It's freaking hard. Number one, you've got to really do it. It takes a long time. You've got to be really determined. There's so many problems, like finding the right people to work with. Getting the money is really hard now again, especially if you're starting out from a napkin and don't have much of it. So it's really, so number one is, you're probably in your brain tested to do it. If you pass the sanity test, don't go do it. It really is crazy to change the world. So I mean, that's number one.
Hello and welcome to the Health Tech Marketing Show, which is brought to you by Health Launchpad and HIMSS. I'm Adam Chirinos. I'm the founder and CEO of Health Launchpad, and I'll be your host for today. If you've been following the show for a while, you'll have noticed two things. One is we went quiet for a bit. And then the second thing is we've changed the name of the show. It's now called the Health Tech Marketing Show. And we've done it for a couple of reasons. I wanted to take a break just to freshen it up. But also, I wanted to think about how we could do more with it. So you're going to see a lot more video. We're going to do some live episodes, and we plan on increasing the frequency. So we are back with a vengeance. And I can't think of a better topic and a better guest to help me re-kick this thing off than today's topic. So today's topic is Digital Health 2024, Not Dead Yet. So if you're familiar with Monty Python, you may get the reference. And I've got a guest today who is just an expert in the topic, Matthew Holt. And Matthew will tell a little bit about himself in a bit. But Matthew is a legend in digital health. And if you look at his LinkedIn, he's also a self-proclaimed healthcare curmudgeon. So really good person to get a sort of objective viewpoint on what's going on. What you may know Matthew for is a couple of things. First of all, he was the founder of Health 2.0, which actually eventually was acquired by HIMSS. And then the other thing that you should know Matthew for, and if you don't, you should look it up, is the healthcare blog, which I think has been going for, is it 2 decades? We'll see. We'll get Matthew to answer in a minute. Anyway, so with that, I am delighted to bring my guest to the stage, Mr. Matthew Holt. How are you, Matthew?
Thanks, Adam. I am fine. And yes, it was quite worrying because the healthcare blog became 20 the year I became 60. So I've been doing it for a third of my life, which sounds like a long time. But you do know this is just an excuse for you to put two old Englishmen in America who both happen to be Chelsea fans together, so we can commiserate what the hell's happened in the last couple of years to our team. Taken over by the Americans, spending billions of pounds and getting worse. Anyway,
this will of course be lost on 90% of the viewers.
No, I was at couldn't have been more American. It was a Notre Dame tailgate at the Stanford Notre Dame game, and I was tackled by a couple of Notre Dame undergrads who told me that they were asking about football and soccer, and they were saying how all American youth are into it. If you want to talk about a great marketing job, the English Premier League, given that no one knew what the hell it was in the 90s anyway, and now worldwide it's like this dominant sports league. That was a great marketing job.
We'll start off with a really controversial statement. Best sports league in the world. Okay, leave that there. Let's get on to digital health.
I'm not sure it's the best, but it's the most worldwide recognized.
All right. Okay.
They didn't need a Netflix special to get it there, unlike Formula One and everyone else. Anyway,
let's get on topic. Otherwise, we'll lose everybody. All right. So 2023 was a turmoil in digital health. Funding cut, companies going out of business. It was crazy. So first of all, two-part questions. First part is, for those of you, what's the difference in digital health and health tech? And then the second thing is, what the bloody hell happened in 2023?
All right. The first one is a long and boring answer to a question which may not make any sense, right? So a lot of people like me, people have been renaming and trying to define what this new technology thing is that isn't quite enterprise EMR, right? So if you think about HIMSS and Health 2.0. HIMSS was really a conference that a lot of stuff went on, but basically the big end grew as the big enterprise EMR stuff grew after meaningful use. But it was growing obviously before that. But as more and more go back to 20 years ago when Kaiser bought Epic, HIMSS had already been around for 50 years by that stage. But the conference really got big in the late 90s and then really grew in the 2000s and all that money came in. Okay. That's enterprise EMR, which is predominantly client server. Then you had this weird Silicon Valley stuff, right? So you think about Google, the cloud, the iPhone, all that stuff that was growing in the early 2000s, came out over the 2000s. And people call that a lot of different stuff. Some people call it M-Health. Some people call it, I try to popularized it as Health 2.0. Later on, I started calling it SMACK.Health, social sensors, mobile, analytics, cloud.
Connected health, that was another one.
That was, yeah. And then there was health. A lot of people call it that. There was, and then Hallie Teco started calling it digital health. There had been a few people calling it digital health sort of in the late 90s, 2000s. But digital, actually, if you think about it, includes all the health enterprise stuff, right? So Epic is digital. It's not paper. I don't think I have a great word for it, but I think health tech is conglomerating all the new cloud-based stuff that we run the rest of our world in, coming into healthcare. But don't forget, the other thing it encompasses in healthcare is a bunch of companies who got funded in digital health, who are actually not just technology companies, but are service companies. So you've got a ton of companies who are providing services using tech-based service companies. And it's always been a bit of a muddle as to which is which. So to some extent, I think the big play has been, if you think about other industries where tech-enabled service companies, so I will pick Amazon because they're a tech-enabled service and retail and everything company, have come in. What they've tended to do is to displace the incumbents, right, who are using the old stuff. I call this I wrote a thing, but jokingly called the Lynn Chow O'Keefe fallacy. Lynn is a VC, now runs her own fund, very successful fund called Defiant Ventures. But at that point, when I was talking to her about this, she was at a client of Perkins, right, which is like the old grand dam of VCs in Silicon Valley.
Oh, yeah.
And Lynn gave this great talk to a Health 2.0 chapter meeting in San Francisco, all about how all the things you should do as a startup to suck up to hospitals and health systems and drug companies and pharma and health plans to sell to them. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the talk, I stood up and said, this sounds great, but why should a startup be doing that? Because when Jeff Bezos came to see John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins and said, I've got this incredible way where I'm going to put the ability to buy books online in 1993 or 2 or whenever the hell it was, or 94. He didn't go to them, I'm here and I'm going to sell this to Barnes & Nobles and Sears and Kmart. He went, I'm going to put those guys out of business, right? There has been a theme within digital health tech-enabled service companies that they're coming to put these incumbents out of business, right? Mm. And you've seen a lot of back and forth. There have obviously been a ton of them who are trying to do the next Epic, sell into the incumbents. And I think what you saw in the last few years is a lot of funding going to all sides of the equation, but also a lot of hubris and money going to people who thought they could put the old guys out of business. And you've seen it happen, I would say, a little bit successfully in some areas, mental health particularly. You have seen big companies which are now tech-enabled service companies which are providing a lot of mental health services online, mm-hmm. In parallel to or instead of the old incumbents or this disaggregated incumbents that were in mental health. But in terms of like really challenging to deliver primary care, or even segmented specialty services or taking over, you've got new players, but they don't look like they're replacing the incumbents.
Yeah.
So I would say what's happened is two things. One, obviously, is the end of zero interest rates and money being tighter. The craziness of Softbank and Tiger dropping 100 million, 200 million into companies every week, that had to end. And that there's always a hangover after one of those big bubbles. So we're going through that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the retrenchment of the incumbents who are, don't forget, in healthcare, very wealthy, very powerful and very entrenched. And I'm talking about the big health plans, all the big hospital systems across the country, most of whom are sitting on somewhere between $1 billion and in some cases 20, 30 billion in their reserves and aren't going to go anywhere. What I would say is that you've seen them having a bit of a time to reflect, and instead of going all the craziness of what was happening 2 years ago, and they were switching to telemedicine and hospital home, all the stuff in the pandemic, they're sitting back and going, okay, how do we get back to business and get our service lines going? And who amongst these digital health companies can help us with that rather than do all this crazy stuff just going on? So I think the market's calming down a bit. And as you said, the money going in is now back to 2016, 2017 levels, which, by the way, we're a lot more than 2011 and 2012 and 2009 levels.
Right. Which is where I started my company, which was, I would say, a health tech company, not a digital health company, in 2012. And it was really hard raising money. It was really hard. And we sold the company in 2019. And I just remember we were a B2B company, and looking at the more consumer friendly digital health companies who were just VCs were falling over themselves to invest in it. I thought, boy, our timing had been terrible. And then it got crazier. So I guess what you're saying is that things are getting back to a norm, and the norm is actually not bad, really.
Yeah. I would say the norm is it not bad? I don't know. I was hopeful that I come from a position believing that the incumbents are never going to change, and that American healthcare is delivered very poorly in general, and that a really big kick up the rear to make a bunch of them move, and we don't have a Tesla, right, to come into the auto industry that we don't have someone who's going to really come in and shake it up and actually make the incumbents change what they're doing.
Yeah.
You could argue back and forth. Some of them are doing it, and General Catalyst is running around with this group of 30 hospitals and says he's going to buy a hospital system. And you've had some people get very aggressive about using new technologies like Jefferson with Steve Klasko in Philadelphia. But in general, they're sitting doing what they're doing. They make their money on the hospital side by the same service lines they used to make their money before, which is
what was it? It's at least 80% fee for service. It's like the move to value-based. It's a bit like you used to say about mobile. It's value-based care is the future of healthcare, and it always will be.
Absolutely. And I would say that what do they make their money on? They make their money on surrounding the hospital with the moat of the primary care doctors they've acquired, or it's the only industry I've heard of where we have referral leakage, right? and it's the thing. It's doing procedures and surgery on hopefully well-insured commercial patients, and some of them make money on Medicare as well. But that, if you think about the sort of go back to what value-based care was supposed to do, and if you think about what Kaiser out here in California was originally set up to, this is a sort of primary care-based preventative system in which not too many people get to the specialist and have those expensive surgeries, and overall the costs get kept down, which is basically what value-based care is. By the way, it's what the NHS from our homeland has been pretty good at doing as well, in terms of keeping the cost down, right? That's never happened, and that's not how the big incumbents in healthcare make their money. You've seen a number of these. I was chatting. I teach a class at USF, University of San Francisco, and had one of these new startup CEOs come and lecture to the class. He's saying, he was in a company which very successfully explained to these hospitals, how they should buy his technology because it was going to reduce the number of admissions and bed days for people with asthma. And then after a while, he went, "Hang on, that's not what you want, is it?" So you got that fundamental dichotomy, and I think really what's happening in digital health is you're having at once the sort of retrenchment of people going, "Christ, we don't get another $100 million from Softbank, so we're never going to make the $3 billion, $4 billion valuation that we got on a $25 million run rate," and that kind of craziness that was going on. But that's not going to happen. So how do we get out of this? Either you go out of business, like an Olive or like a Calibrate basically has done, or which B2B and B2C right there, or Calibrate was weight management, Olive was B2B hospital sort of automation. They're not quite clear what Olive was, but to finish the thought, either you do that or you get slammed together. So General Catalyst is right now slamming a bunch of its companies together. Commure and also called it Casa all got slammed together, and they're it wasn't a Casa, somebody else said something. But you get the idea, is that this has all been put right on a sort of cap table basis, and that's a very painful process, right? Yeah. People lose their jobs, people who thought they were worth billions of dollars or millions of dollars are now worth nothing. It's not fun.
No, I've been in that movie. Who are like the winners and losers at that? Who is coming out of this actually either intact or maybe in better shape? Who's in a sort of actually pretty good position for the next few years?
Ooh,
if you don't want to name names, talk about sectors maybe.
I think that there are, I would say, you can name it. I mentioned mental health, and I would say that's going to be changed forever. That got a lot of attention in the pandemic because everyone was sitting at home and noticed that they were all depressed, anxious, all their children were going crazy. I think all three things happened to in my house. Or to me, actually. But so you really saw a massive growth, both in the sort of awareness of that sector, but also in people response. So you've now got, they probably were overfunded, but a number of leading companies, I'm thinking Lyra, Ginger Headspace, Spring Health, a bunch of others in that area. So I think that area is one where that's a sector which is very different and we'll see. But now I was just at this Celebrate Tabiba's behavioral health tech conference, and behavioral Behavioral health tech. Yeah, behavioral health tech. We were at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and it does look like that the big plans are getting serious now about realizing that mental health is a big deal and crosses into physical health in many ways, and they should start figuring out how to manage this. And they have to start managing the issue with which they have in other areas of healthcare, which is there aren't enough qualified staff. How do you automate? How do you use AI to help? All that stuff, right? That's one area.
By the way, I'd like to mark it. We're 16 minutes into a conversation about digital health, and that's the first use of AI.
Don't worry. I was going to come up. So the second one, which is having, and bizarrely, while we're having this chaos in the sort of services and tech for incumbents and cramming together and we're having insanity in the AI side, right? Which is, so two areas I would point out. One is one in which a company I've been advising called Carenostics is doing well, but a bunch of others are, which is like AI for analytics, figuring out if we can throw AI at all this data, who's doing what, who's going to get sick, who is sick but doesn't know it. How do we basically use artificial intelligence and data to improve data analytics? So that is one big area, and that bleeds into drug discovery and clinical trials as well. It's one of those two. Both treatment. Can you figure out who's got what? Because identifying people for clinical trials and then actually getting them into them, but also treating them, right, with the people who don't know what they've got. So I think that's one area of AI. The other one is blatantly obvious, is provider burnout, physician burnout. And if with these new dictation companies, I don't know if you've seen companies like Nabla, Bridge.
I know DeepScribe really well.
Okay, DeepScribe. All these guys, I just read some reviews on this. There's a database called Elion, which I try to sell a data set I own too and fail, but they have now got reviews on like Suki, a bunch of the others. And the answer is they're all pretty damn good, right? Yeah. They can all take a random conversation like the one we're having with a clinical background and pass it out and stick it in the note. And in some cases, they're pretty soon will be sticking it in the medical record, and pretty soon they'll be sticking it directly to order sets. And it will be saving a ton of time and effort, energy for doctors. So I think that's the second.
And it's all about the burnout issue, right? Because suddenly you've got doctors, rather than doing the consult like that, can actually talk to you directly and actually engage with the patient, and they're going to feel better about what they're doing. The patient's doing live. I think it goes way, the benefit goes way beyond just the efficiency.
I think it saves a ton of time. It improves the experience, and it's getting so literally. I did a thing with DeepScribe as well, but I did an interview with the Bridge. I used their product in 2019 when it was a consumer-facing product, and it really didn't work.
Yeah.
And I did an interview with the CEO the other day where we just had a conversation over Zoom, and it was generating a note in the background. And he was saying ridiculous stuff like, "Oh, Matt, I saw you at McDonald's eating 17 cheeseburgers and whatever." And it translated into the note, patient still using fast food. It was really super clever, got everything right, didn't miss anything. And, they just got a big round from a big funding round. And they just got picked up by, I think, a big hospital system in Georgia. But Nabla, which is a French company doing the same sort of thing, just got picked up by Kaiser, Northern California. So you're seeing this is a thing that's starting to go. And the last,
it's a big incumbent there, right? With Nuance, because they've got
and then you've got Daxtra Nuance, which is, I think, now owned by Microsoft, which I think is doing very well, but is very expensive. But they have it in with Epic. I think a Bridge has it in with Epic. Everyone else will be fighting the war to get on Epic's Partners and Pals program and figuring out what they do. They have to bribe Judy Ford to get onto that.
Right, yeah.
But I think that's the second area. The last area I would say is there is a couple of clever companies. The one I like particularly is called Infinitus, which does voice-based AI bots, which figure out admin stuff. Their thing calls from a provider to a payer about prior authorization. And what the dirty secret is, there's no technology there in the payer. There's somebody on the phone reading a manual saying, for a patient who's 35 years old who has this condition, we require the following 17 tests and the following 19 forms in order. And the bot can sit on the phone, talk to them like a human, record all that information, pass it all out, spit it back out to the provider, sitting on hold is like 20 minutes for half these at a time. So they've got and eventually that will get taken away and become just AI APIs to APIs. But for now, using AI to deal with the messy process. And that actually came from, you remember there was a Google demo of this about 4 or 5 years ago where the AI Google bot called a restaurant and asked which days they were open and could reserve a table. You may not remember that, but the inspiration came with that. And the CEO was working at Google at the time, and his wife said, why the hell would you use it for that when you could have this other problem here in healthcare, which is much worse, instead of trying to figure out.
The obvious one is, as a patient, then booking an appointment. But then on the other side of it, which is what the other side of that problem is, the no-show. So it's, if you've got a no-show, so there's something dialing through, quickly dialing through to see if you've got any local patients you can get in quickly. So
yes, there are a ton of ways that AI will pick up admin as well. But so we mentioned AI. You feel better now?
Yeah, I do. I think we check that box. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What do you think? The thing which has surprised me, I've been in various other aspects of technology for a few decades before I got into healthcare. And the thing which has surprised me is how the big tech companies, maybe with the exception of Amazon kind of saucer, have not really cracked it the way that they have with other industries. Do you think, how do you think, do you see them ever really cracking the code? The level of disruption they have in other industries?
They could. I don't know if they have the will. They've danced around it. It's a big piece of the market, but it's a long way away from their core. And the bits that, so what is Google doing in Google Health after the brand name has been around for 15 years? They were going to do personal health records. They were going to do this, they were going to do that. What are they doing? They're doing search. AI-based search and data. Well, they're good at search, right? Amazon, yes, it's bought One Medical, but to my mind, that's like buying Whole Foods. That's buying a high-end chain that gets you access to some rich or wannabe rich people. I'm a One Medical member, wannabe rich people. But it's not really going after the core of what Amazon Care was, which they shut down, which was like tended to build a nationwide virtual medical group, which could have really gone after primary care nationwide. Maybe One Medical will change around and become that. So I don't really see that. Apple is staying very close to home. The watch, or what kind of biometric stuff can you in the watch? But they have sleep stuff and whatever. But I don't see that anybody coming in and saying we're going to fundamentally try to manage care.
Yeah. And
you've got now some pretty big players in the, obviously United Health Group is by far the biggest, but you've got some pretty big players at all levels of healthcare provision. And I think probably healthcare stays on its own. It's also so regulated and so different. And by the way, those guys are about to be regulated and are getting more and more regulated in a bunch of ways, especially with this AI stuff that they're all doing. And not to mention the privacy stuff they're all in trouble with and the monopoly stuff that they're all in trouble with. So I think they've all had a good look and went, the actual effort of getting to become a sizable part of the healthcare system is too much. The only one that's had a real go recently was Oracle, which bought Cerner, but they were buying essentially the number 2 and going down EMR. Right. When the game in the EMR space is pretty much over, right? Epic's pretty much won the inpatient side, and Cerner's been kicked out of most hospital systems rather than winning new ones. So I don't see them coming in. Having said that, Bloomberg had an article about how Amazon was failing and doing not much in healthcare yesterday, but on the healthcare blog, Kim Ballard, one of my contributors, wrote an article about how hang out, wait 10, 15 years, UPS and FedEx said that Amazon was not going to be a rival, and now they're the biggest delivery company in America. So you can't tell.
Yeah, it is interesting. Microsoft bought Nuance, which is smart. They've done, I always think Microsoft is definitely cool again. And
what do you mean again?
Oh, come on! You go back 5-10 years, and it was all.
No, it certainly wasn't cool for most of its history, right? Because it wasn't Apple, and then Steve Ballmer was cool.
Oh, I see.
When he was dancing on stage and going,
horrible.
Yes, and they've got a lot of good bets across multiple industries, a bunch of other stuff.
They've done brilliant. The Amazon one is interesting, right? Because they've made several big announcements and then backed out of them. There was the sort of the three-way
Haven thing,
which they did with JP Morgan and
halfway,
and then backed out of that one, and then Care One, which they backed out. So it's but they then there's always I think a lot of people think they're going to make a huge play, or they're in the process of making a huge play in the pharmacy space, and
I would tell you what, and I've told the One Medical people this directly because I know some people there. I said, now you've got Amazon. One of the biggest problems consumers face is figuring out where they are in pharmacy chain, where the drugs are cheapest, who's got what drug, especially when you have problems with supply chain. A lot of areas, I happen to have kids with ADHD, and that's a massive problem. Where is the actual drug? Who can get it to me? Delivery, there are some drug delivery companies, and also renewals and managing that whole process. That is not to mention compliance, right? And be reminded, that is a massive problem for anybody who's on medication, which is basically everybody in America. And then many people are on many medications, right? The average person over 60 is on 5 or something, and the average person in Medicare is on 7 to 9 or whatever. But kids these days are on a lot more medications than they used to be, and we have many other problems. Now we have these super expensive drugs coming along for obesity and whatever. I think if there's a consumer problem that can be fixed with pharmacy, but with access to doctors, with One Medical and others, and now they have the Amazon Clinic online, they could do a lot of good fixing that, which is something that probably nobody else, maybe CVS could figure it out, but they have a key interest in keeping it confusing and expensive because they have a PBM. So I think Amazon could do that. They could probably acquire one of these startup wannabe PBMs and have a consumer-facing service that they could sell to employers and others. I think there's a lot they could do there. Will they do it? Who knows? Maybe in 10 years we wake up and all of our drugs from Amazon.
Last question for you. I know I've done quite a lot of work with startups. I've had my own startup.
You're still alive. Haven't had a heart attack and a stroke.
Oh, yeah, the grey hairs.
It's not that great. The dye is working, Adam.
What's that?
The dye is working.
The dye, yeah.
Hair dye.
Yeah, exactly.
Mine is neither my hair dye nor the transplant took. Yeah.
So here's the question. So if you were talking to an early stage digital health startup right now, with all the stuff that's gone on, particularly in the last year, what advice would you give them? I
talk to CEOs all the time. I literally was on the line with the CEO who left another Brit, by the way, left a high profile job at a health system to go and run his own company in the obesity space. But I talk to CEOs all the time.
Yeah,
it's freaking hard. Number one, you've got to really do it. It takes a long time. You've got to be really determined. There's so many problems, like finding the right people to work with. Getting the money is really hard now again, especially if you're starting up from a napkin and don't have much. So number one is you're probably in your brain tested to do it. If you pass the sanity test, don't go do it. It really is crazy people changing the world. That's number one. The second piece of advice is I think you can't expect again to have the craziness come. That craziness that comes is like once every 20 years, maybe once every decade. You can't expect to get somewhere and be loaded up with money. Now, maybe I'll be wrong, and maybe in 3 years' time, it'll all be the Saudis dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into it yet again, and maybe it'll be like AI is now. But that really means you've got to figure out, can I find a market or a customer, and then maybe both, who will let me build the thing? Because you look at the really historically great companies in a space, they've been built with customer revenue. And you go back to Microsoft, that's what they were done, right? Built with IBM's revenue. Go to Epic, built with customer revenue, outside funding. So to my mind, that's the reason. Can you build something where you can show not just proof of concept and a cool product and a nice bus at a conference, but can you show that you have real customer adoption, whatever that looks like, that has a strong potential to be profitable quickly, and then build a thing on revenue? Can you do that? In that case, you can probably attract somebody to help you. If you can't show that, you're doing the wrong thing. And my other advice in this is that if it's not working, if banging your head against the wall, and you've been doing it for some time, stop and find another wall to bang your head against, because the market is going to tell you, right? The effort you're going to put out. I see a lot of startup entrepreneurs who are hacking away at the same thing year after year, and I'm going, this hasn't been working. You haven't been attracting the customers. You haven't attracted the money. The product isn't quite working. It's not you. It's them, right? It's not me. It's you. So when I say when I break out with girls, it's the market and the market. And sometimes you may just be too early. You may be wrong. Whatever. Find something else to do.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's, if it's not working relatively easily, and there is a lot of traction to it, and a lot of take up, it's the wrong thing. And don't delude yourself.
It's great. That's great that advice. I always think about like a sailing analogy, which is if you're in a race and you're racing upwind, you're attacking, and so if you're in the back of the fleet, everybody's ahead of you, and so go on the other tack. You never know; they might get a favorable wind, and it might go the other way. And that was the issue that I had with my own startup, was that we were up against big incumbents and really well funded competitors, and we were not well funded. And so we just took a tack and said, whatever they said they're not going to do, which was in their case was customization, we're going to do that. And it worked out okay for us. But I hear you. So Matthew, this was great. Great discussion as expected. Just want to let anybody know who's listening, who's watching, you can subscribe to this on whatever your favorite podcast app, Apple, Spotify, whatever the latest is. And you can watch this on YouTube and other channels like that. We've got lots of other episodes coming up. We're really going to mix it up. And my goal is to really increase the frequency. So watch out for the Health Tech Marketing Show coming to a digital channel near you. Matthew, thank you, and come on you Blues.
Thanks, Adam. My fingers are crossed, not very firmly.